and good for them. The police. But in more recent years...
Yeah. Police, I guess. Ooh, this is aged poorly. Stop getting me to tactically they, them. Buffalo Bill, first of all. Second of all, what is Buffalo Bill sewing? What is Buffalo Bill sewing? What is he making? The question is, Silence of the Lambs worse than rape? To this person, probably yeah. Let's begin. It was brought to my attention the other day on twitter.com that there is a trans woman from the United Kingdom. Okay, from the United Kingdom. And this is a person who had like somewhat of a notable Twitter presence. Somewhat, I say. She regularly interacted with J.K. Rowling and things of that nature. A lot of, trans discourse on Maine, if you will. And one of the biggest things that she kind of got into the weeds about as far as trans discourse is concerned was allowing women, trans women, into crisis rate. And obviously that's hairy enough discourse as it is. It's a sensitive subject. It's a very, touchy subject on all sides of the conversation. And I don't really think there's like a blanket prescription that you can make for something like that. I think that it's very, very subjective. It depends on who you talk to. There's all different sides of it where it's like, who cares about trans women who are victims? They should, go to the streets and die. And then of course there's the Xander Hall-esque takes where it's like, get over your pussy, those kinds of conversations as well. None of which is the ire of my interest here. So this is her. This is Lexi Bowen, somewhat of a prominent poster, what have you. So this caught my ire as well, is that she does the Silence of the Lambs review, which we will be watching here shortly. And then this is a screenshot of her video, of course. She was recently arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 6 years in prison for... So... /Silence of the Lambs review, yay. So this is the BBC article that discusses her sentence, and it discusses her sexual assault, where essentially what happened is she went to a party and there was a woman who was a little bit too drunk, and she said, let's go for a walk, it'll sober you up. They went for a walk and she ran in the woods. So obviously, this is despicable, detestable, disgusting behavior that I obviously do not support, even in the slightest. I think the endless irony of somebody arguing for access to, for trans women that turns out to be is something that is quite alarming for many, many different reasons. And I understand that we just went from 0 to 100 very quickly. Something that I find very troubling in a lot of the discourse around trans women's place in women's spaces, especially spaces that are like designated crisis areas, especially in the context of sexual assault and sexual violence. It's a very, very delicate conversation to have. However, I will say that I do find it quite incredibly ironic and glaring that this is somebody who is advocating for their inclusion in these environments, as somebody who, quote unquote, at one point said that she was a victim of being assaulted by women before. And unfortunately, we know that the opposite is actually true, that in the past, she was the one who was assaulting women, not the other way around. So obviously we went 0 to 100. We just kind of like speed ran all of this. I have nothing but contempt in my heart for people that behave this way. Obviously, I think that people like this enjoy prison, have fun in there, I guess, I suppose. And I think it's incredibly fucked up. But in lieu of all of this, of course, the Silence of the Lambs kind of review that she did came into the questions of the purview because there are a lot of transgender undertones to Silence of the Lambs, obviously, for anyone who has seen the film. So I wanted to indulge a little bit and watch this video, not only with the context that we have now about her behavior, but also just... There's a lot of bad takes about Silence of the Lambs that usually come from trans people, unfortunately. Sorry, trans people. But a lot of trans people have really dog shit takes about Silence of the Lambs and its place as like a transgender like awareness film or whatever. But obviously, we'll switch gears to a little bit of a lighter tone. Fuck this Lexi person for every reason under the sun, obviously, up until this point. But let's lighten the mood a little bit. Let's lighten the mood a little bit and talk a little bit about these dog shit takes about Silence of the Lambs as well. Woo!
We've already established how Mann's film looks and feels like a generic thriller, but by contrast, Demi's The Silence of the Lambs is a full-blown gothic horror. Far from the pristine white walls and bars of Lex's Sally Mann's movie, in The Silence of the Lambs,
It's a gothic horror. Is there one good take in this whole video?
Lecter may as well be being kept in a castle dungeon. The Silence of the Lambs doesn't look like a thriller in the way that Manhunter does. It has far more in common aesthetically with a horror film. It's all dark shadows, smoky rooms, and nightmarish imagery.
How did you feel when you saw him, Clarice?
And despite its success at the box office, critical response was initially mixed. While the performances received acclaim, particularly those of Foster and Hopkins, reviewers of the time were less taken with the film's horror tendencies. This is perhaps best exemplified by critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, who took opposing views when discussing the film on their show, Siskel and Ebert.
A guy who's truly frightening doesn't need, a huge organ playing in the background. I didn't buy it at all.
This is the movies. What did you want? A documentary, black and white?
And while the film's success is now undeniable and its complexity and craft pretty much universally agreed to be top-notch, I think it's hard to deny that it, has a nasty streak. The subject matter alone is violent and uncomfortable, and I expect this aspect, this adjacency to the horror genre, was the reason many of its detractors were put off. The label of psychological horror here acts like a descriptor more in line with a term like elevated horror. It's a way to describe a film that's a horror movie, but that the powers that be have decided for some reason is acceptable to enjoy. Even Lecter's now iconic mask wouldn't look out of place in a slasher.
Apparently, Lewis had murdered a transient and done things with the skin.
So if The Silence of the Lambs is, as Clover puts it, a slasher film for yuppies, then Starling specifically is the equivalent of that genre's victim-come-hero protagonist, the final girl. Like Clover's final girl, Starling
I don't understand how, is there no media analysis here, you guys?
is sexually unavailable. She repeatedly turns down the various men who make advances on her, and her appearance is professional rather than sexualized. Foster doesn't play Clarice as glamorous or seductive in any way, and there's no love interest, no romance, and no hint of overt and obvious stereotypical femininity.
That doesn't interest me, Doctor. Frankly, it's the sort of thing that Miggs would say.
For Clover, the first true final girl was Sally Hardesty, the protagonist of Tobe Hooper's 1974 nightmare, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But she acknowledges that Sally, and by extension the final girl archetype, is part of a progression that begins with Vera Miles' Lila Crane from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Patience doesn't run in my family, Sam. I'm going out there.
In Psycho, Lila is the sister of the doomed Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh. She arrives at the motel after the private detective she and Marion's boyfriend, Sam Loomis, have hired goes missing. It is Lila who discovers the body of Mother in the basement, but it is Sam who ultimately takes the murderous mama's boy out. Clover writes,
With the introduction of the final girl, then, the Psycho formula is radically altered. It is not merely a question of enlarging the figure of Lila, but of absorbing into her role, in varying degrees, the functions of Arbogast, the investigator, and Sam, the rescuer, and restructuring the narrative action from beginning to end around her progress in relation to the killer.
With this in mind then, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Starling represents a sort of distillation of this idea. She doesn't just adopt the role of investigator, she quite literally is an investigator. She's not just taking on the traits of rescuer, that's integral to her mission and her journey across the film. Like Clover's final girl, she finds herself in a one-on-one showdown with the killer come the film's close. But unlike the many
By pain. By lemon time.
iterations of the character to have come before her, for Starling, this is her mission from the outset. It is her purpose, it is her job.
I graduated from UVA, Doctor. It's not a charter school.
Starling isn't weaker, as she proves time and time again, and yet The Silence of the Lambs' intent seems to be to display just how different her experiences are from those of her male counterparts, and how much more work than them she must put into being successful come the finale because of her gender.
Yes, and I would have missed the pleasure of your company, sir.
In a more overt example, Miggs, the psychotic neighbour of Hopkins' Lecter, sexualises her, flinging his semen on her. While in a less obvious example, when she joins Crawford on a visit to see the recently discovered body of Bill's latest victim, she struggles to get the attention of a room full of male police officers when asking them to leave.
Go on now.
Even Crawford uses Starling's perceived weaknesses due to her femininity as a means of controlling the situation, something Starling herself then calls him out.
Matters, Mr. Crawford. Cops look at you to see how to act. Matters.
In fact, the only male character that doesn't seem to view Starling in gendered terms is Lecter himself. And Lecter represents a curious progression in terms of the Silence of the Lambs slasher traits. At first glance, it could be easy to consign him to the label of movie monster, and in many regards he is. He's a frightening presence, and Hopkins plays him as such. Demi had his sights set on Anthony Hopkins after having seen him in David Lynch's 1980 biographical drama The Elephant Man.
Am I a good man? Or am I a bad man?
Demi's casting choices were initially met with resistance, but he managed to strike a deal with the studio. If he agreed to cast Foster in the role of Starling, then they can let him have Hopkins. It's hard to deny...
Okay, can we get to okay, here, let's just go to the transphobia section, guys. Let's go to the transphobia section.
Right, so I want to preface this bit by saying that everything I've said about The Silence of the Lambs thus far are things that I consider to be true. The film is a well-made, well-acted, well-directed, superbly written piece of filmmaking that does precisely what it sets out to do in an expert manner. Clarice is a feminist icon, in my opinion, and rightly so. She changed the game, introducing mainstream audiences to a female hero who was neither a love interest or a damsel in distress. Lecter is an icon of the genre, a legitimately frightening presence who remains, to this day, one of the most beloved and recognisable horror villains ever committed to screen.
Yes, transphobia, let's go.
All of these things are true, and yet, I hate it. When it's discussed in those terms, I struggle to disagree with absolutely anything that's being said, and yet, well, there's always the elephant in the room. Or should that be Buffalo in the room? Leave me alone. Of course, almost immediately the film drew outrage for its depiction of Buffalo Bill, as we've already covered. Demonstrators even gathered at the Academy Awards when the film was nominated, resulting in 10 arrests after 2 of the protesters threw things at the red carpet, and others refused to move from an intersection despite police orders. And good for them. The police. But in more recent years...
yeah, fuck the police, I guess. Ooh, this is aged poorly.
People have started to acknowledge the harm the film has done to the transgender community. As I outlined in Chapter 1, regardless of where you sit on the legitimacy of their transness, whatever the hell that means, Buffalo Bill is a trans character and that creates an issue. And as a trans woman...
Buffalo Bill is not a trans character! It's like the whole fucking point of the movie.
Myself, I can confirm that The Silence of the Lambs has had a negative impact on me and, well, who I am. Excellent.
Well, yeah, because you describe Buffalo Bill as a violent misogynist who wants to wear women's faces for sport, and then in the same breath you say that, well, yeah, that's what makes him trans. Oh.
Though it is a brilliant example of filmmaking as a craft, expertly pieced together and delivered through countless different ways, it's impossible not to always have the frustration, the irritation, and the anger in the back of my mind. I can't talk about Silence of the Lambs without talking about The Thing, and The Thing in turn winds up becoming both larger than the sum of its parts, and also intrinsically entwined within them.
So powerful, so beautiful.
Because you see, the real problem I have here is that every single positive thing about The Silence of the Lambs sits alongside the negative, and actually enhances it. The Silence of the Lambs isn't just this great film that happens to have a problematic thing placed into the middle of it. The problematic thing is the whole film itself. Let me explain. While Clarice herself is widely regarded as being a feminist icon, the question lingers over whether or not the film itself can be really considered feminist. The flick's focus on Starling's experiences, with its
No, let's hear this take.
almost point-of-view camera and emphasis on gender politics she encounters, is undeniable, and I certainly don't want to detract from that.
Yes, very much, sir. Very much.
Clarice's journey is a feminist one, but there's something incredibly surface level about it. She tackles the patriarchy in all forms. She takes it on in her role at the FBI, she takes it on throughout the investigation, but what form does the big bad boss of this smash the patriarchy narrative take? A trans woman.
While we may respond to Starling's development of traditionally masculine virtues, the film nonetheless employs grotesque imagery connected with both the female body, the very concept of Bill's women's suit, but also in the visceral aftermath of the abandoned bodies, and femininity in the form of Buffalo Bill himself.
Through Buffalo Bill, the film takes on a far more nastier and much more patriarchal attitude towards gender. And in doing so, it inadvertently positions transness in opposition to feminism. Clarice is allowed to
the main antagonist of the movie is Hannibal Lecter. The main antagonist of the film is Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal Lecter, okay? Buffalo Bill is not trans. Clarice says transsexuals are passive in nature and are not prone to violence. Silence of the Lambs is a movie about female empowerment versus trans women. This is worse than the In Praise of Shadows movie or video response or whatever to fucking The Hills Have Eyes. This is worse. I didn't think it was possible.
Adopt masculine traits because she remains, despite her breaking down of gendered stereotypes, securely within them. Sure, she shoots her gun, trains hard, and commands the situation, but she also wears skirts, shows emotion, and flirts with men.
Are you hitting on me, Doctor?
Yes.
In the book, it's
women notoriously never do any of those things. Women never wear skirts. Women never flirt with men. And women never shoot guns. Like,
somebody even hinted that these two characters get together. And who can blame her? I mean, look at him.
The whole point is that she's the feminist aspect of this scene. So allow me to demonstrate real media literacy for you guys, okay? The purpose of the scene is to demonstrate that, like, Clarice is in control of her sexuality and her femaleness in a male-dominated field. So throughout the movie, men are taking passes at her. We even, at the beginning of this video, analyze the part where the main dude who wants her to interview Lecter is like making passes at her. And then after she shuts him down, he's kind of a dick to her. That she has to fight for authority in any given situation because she's a woman, even though she's the one that's called there as the expert to be able to talk to Hannibal Lecter. This is an example of her using her sexuality to get what she wants out of a man. That is like the point, is that you flip the sexualization of women on its head and you give women the power and the control in the situation to use their sexuality to manipulate a situation to get what they want. That's like the feminist iconography of it all. That's why any movie that features a woman who selectively uses her sexuality to gain the upper hand in any situation given to her is viewed through a feminist lens. Like, my deep breaths are not working.
Buffalo Bill, meanwhile, is not afforded the same leniency. They push the breaking of gender stereotypes too far. They wear makeup, they sew, they sleep with men.
No, it's... They sew? They sew? What are they sewing? Lexi? What is... Stop getting me to tactically they, them. Buffalo Bill, first of all. Second of all, what is Buffalo Bill sewing? What is Buffalo Bill sewing? What is he making? He's making suits out of the skin of women. It's not like Project Runway. It's not Project Runway. He's making a skin suit made out of women's skin. Oh my god. I'm gonna cry.
These things are coded feminine, and so, unlike Clarice, Bill rejects their gender as assigned at birth and seeks to transform themselves entirely into something else.
It's not about rejecting his gender assigned at birth, it's that he has mommy issues. No.
Groundbreaking to point out the transformation motif present in the film. Transformation is a core thematic concern of the Silence of the Lambs, visualized through the imagery of the death's head moth, which has arguably become as iconic as the film itself.
The significance of the moth is changed. Caterpillar into chrysalis, or pupa. From then...
Or, hear me out, and this is just a big question, okay? Is like, it's a death's head moth, right? So they're talking about, like, death. People are dying. He's killing people. It's like a calling card. It's like a normal thing that, like, serial killers in movies do, right? Like, that's like a... And if anything, the core crux of Buffalo Bill's character arc is that this is, like, his deluded attempt to self-soothe and, like, deal with the trauma of, like, his mommy issues. It's not that he genuinely wants to transition into a woman. He wants to be his mom. Guys, does it make you trans if you want to be your own mom? What?
Bill seeks to transform themselves, of course. The bodies of the victims are transformed into clothes. Clarice transforms from untested trainee into experienced agent. Even Lecter transforms himself during his violent escape by wearing the face of poor old Sergeant Pembroke.
That's crazy. We just listed off like 37 fucking explanations for the allegories of transition in the fucking film or whatever the fuck. But the only one that we seem to like really harp on is that, wow, he wants to be a woman. No, bitch, he wants to be his mom.
While the other officer is transformed into the horrific Francis Bacon-inspired Angel. And speaking of transformations, fun little tidbit, the skull-faced pattern on the moth featured on the poster is actually taken from a surrealist portrait by Salvador Dali, which features 7 naked women positioned to create the illusion of a skull. Not relevant.
It's not relevant at all, I'm just saying.
But interesting. More women as objects, very clever. Lecter himself provides an especially interesting juxtaposition for Bill. As we've covered, his placement within the narrative is as a sort of Van Helsing, and as such he leaves the role of Dracula open for Bill. Dracula, it's worth noting, drinks the lifeblood of his victims and, in doing so, rejuvenates from old man into young one. Bill's relationship with their victims is in some ways similar. They take the skin for their own form of rejuvenation. I don't think there's any point in arguing that in terms of monstrousness, Bill is painted as far worse than Lecter.
I can't believe I'm having Buffalo Bill's motive rape explained to me. Mr. Mollusk with another banger. Holy shit.
As a horror movie, Bill is the Silence of the Lambs monster. But it's worth asking, why is Lecter afforded a much more sympathetic role than Bill? I mean, I doubt we'd...
Because he's not cutting up women, sewing them into suits, and trapping them at the bottom of the well to moisturize well enough to make skin suits out of. Hannibal Lecter in the movie is painted as sympathetic because he's someone who is intelligent and understands his predilections and actively understands like the source of the roots. He understands that he's a cannibal. He understands that cannibalism is wrong. And he's aiding in the federal investigation of trying to find Buffalo Bill. Like, Hannibal Lecter is perceived as like more likable and more like empathetically because that's how that's how it's written. I'm almost positive that in the book, him and Clarice like become cannibals together. Do they not? Like, it's because he's intelligent, well-read, and he's somebody who's aiding in the investigation, and he understands like that he's sick in the fucking head. Buffalo Bill just decides to make lady suits for shits and giggles.
Never see Billy Crystal show up at the Oscars with his bits tucked between his legs.
I'm having some of the Academy over for dinner. Care to join me?
Lecter is given something of a pass, at least on the movie's terms, despite...
Well, and again, he's like the main, like, antagonist of the film. Like, if you look up horror movie posters of, like, horror movie villains or whatever the fuck, it's not Buffalo Bill that's on the posters, it's Hannibal Lecter in The Mask. It's because the movie is about... It's about Hannibal Lecter. It's about Hannibal Lecter.
Despite his own monstrousness, in part because he doesn't threaten the gender binary. Despite the campy elements of Hopkins' performance, Lecter never completely crosses the boundaries of heteronormativity in the way that Buffalo Bill does.
It's not about, oh my god, it's not about Buffalo, it's, oh my god, it's not because Hannibal Lecter isn't gay. Oh my god. Everybody loves Hannibal Lecter because he's straight. That's why everybody likes him. That's why everybody was super happy when he filleted the prison guard alive and then slung him slinkily from the little cage. Yes, very true.
Does.
You think you can dissect me with this blunt little tool?
To put it bluntly, Hannibal is straight enough to get away with eating people. Of course, the queer coding of Hannibal as a character...
He's straight enough to get away with eating people. This entire video is a self-report. Fuck.
Has been present since he first appeared in book form, and Brian Fuller's cult series Hannibal, which reimagines the Good Doctor's relationship with Red Dragon's hero Will Graham, brought this subtext screaming and kicking out of the closet into full-blown text.
Did you just smell me? Difficult to avoid.
But in terms of cinematic appearances, and especially in terms of Demi's movie, his queerness is kept kind of on the down low. Lecter here is queer-coded, but he's also locked in a relationship with Starling, one that is somehow simultaneously platonic and romantic in equal measure.
People will say we're in love.
And while the film never makes an assertion one way or the other about Lecter's sexuality, it does make a point of emphasising that Lecter's prior relationship with Bill's first victim, the doomed Benjamin Raspail, was an entirely professional one.
Best thing for him, really. His therapy was going nowhere.
Which is a far cry.
Yeah, guys, we need to have a really serious conversation about straight privilege and cannibal discourse. Very true.
From Buffalo Bill now, isn't it? Beyond their horrifying crimes, the film presents Bill as monstrous simply for being who they are. There is...
Buffalo Bill is monstrous because he murders women, chops them up, and makes their skin into suits. That is actually why Buffalo Bill is monstrous. It's not because Buffalo Bill does the little sleigh boss girl dance. It's not because Buffalo Bill puts on makeup. It's not because Buffalo Bill is a little fruity. It's actually because he, like, kills people, women particularly, and chops them up and makes little suits out of their skin. That's actually why. Oh my god, I hate myself.
There's no more clear example of this than the infamous dance scene.
Which is very slay, I might say.
Okay, so obviously YouTube isn't going to let me show the whole scene because, well, YouTube. But this scene is the moment when I was a kid that I knew that the world was rejecting me. It's the moment...
This entire video is like, oh my god, it's aged like fine wine. It's like you couldn't have picked a better example of like somebody who relates to Buffalo Bill as a character and literally sees themselves in Buffalo Bill. Like you couldn't have picked like a better example of this. This is insane. This is insane. The first time that I saw Buffalo Bill, I was self-actualized, and I realized too that I hated women and I had to be violent against them. Like, Hello? You guys. This had to be used as evidence in the case. This video had to be used. They had to watch this video in court. Jesus Christ.
Moment when I knew that the world was equating me questioning my sexuality and my gender with a psychotic serial murderer who abducts and starves young women before killing them and then mutilating their corpses.
Well, girl, you were a couple of steps away from that, but you were certainly getting there. Jesus Christ.
And you know what? I'm tired of trying to pretend like The Silence of the Lambs is some untouchable masterpiece because, yeah, the directing's brilliant and the performances are great. And isn't the script wonderful? Yes,
the tragic news is that transitioning made it a whole hell of a lot worse.
Things are true, but it's also one of the most offensive, dangerous, and harmful things I've ever f***ing seen in my life.
I don't know, dude. I think that trans people that are like pedophiles, rapists, like all this other shit, I think that that's actually the most harmful and offensive thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I think that actually, as this person peers into the mirror, that is going to be the most, like, fucking offensive thing. But whatever.
I tuck. Some trans women tuck. That's a thing that f***ing happens. And
the whole point is that he wants to wear a woman's suit to be mom. That's the point. It's not that he's tucking because he has gender dysphoria. It's because that he wants to be mom. That's the whole point. It's not the same thing as a trans woman. Like, we're almost done, guys. We're so close.
And here it is, paraded up on the screen for everyone to see, like it's the f***ing horrifying equivalent of Dracula feasting on his victims. Look at the freak. Look at the monster.
The freak monster that cuts up, like in the scene that she is literally describing right now, he's wearing a woman's scalp as a wig. Not just the hair, the scalp. A scalped woman's head. Top part of a woman's head is on his head. Yes, he is a disturbing, disgusting freak who cuts up and murders women to wear their skin as suits. Yes. I think male.
Get f***ed. There's even a subtle attempt to tie Bill in with white supremacy. We see a swastika on their bedding, but this only further salts the wound as far as I'm concerned. Trans people were among the first groups targeted by the Nazis. And here we have a film like The Silence of the Lambs equating transness with Nazis. How about
equating transness to Nazis? Equating transness. But then yes, Buffalo Bill is not a true transsexual. Transsexuals are passive. They don't often engage in violence. Yes. Therefore, Bill is not a true transsexual. You'll have to see who was rejected from accessing a sex change in order to find Bill. Did you even watch the movie? I also did not see this coming.
Very turfy. Beyond the killing, beyond the
very turfy.
obvious and undeniable horror, Buffalo Bill is seen as terrifying because of their transness, and in turn, because of their transness, they are dangerous. In their 1979 book,
No, I'm pretty sure that they literally say in the movie, they're like, transsexuals aren't dangerous.
Transsexual Empire, which has become so influential on modern gender critics that I'd almost go so far as to say it's like their Bible, Janice G. Raymond wrote, all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves.
Do we have to explain the irony here?
One could just as easily use that as a descriptor for Buffalo Bill. They harm women and appropriate their bodies in order for their own transition to take place. It's literally...
Okay, but he wants to transition into his mom.
Really the turf idea of what a trans woman is. A dangerous, violent male taking women's bodies for their own gratification.
But that's the whole point, is that Buffalo Bill is a deranged, violent male. He's not a trans person.
He's building a woman's suit from the skin of their victims. They lure the victims into a false sense of security by pretending to be weak and innocent before pouncing. Bill dehumanizes them, refers to them as it, reducing them to artifacts, viewing them quite literally as little more than objects.
It rubs the lotion on its skin.
I don't think that she mentioned it at all, did she? Or has she? I don't think that she did.
Or else gets the hose again.
And despite the half-assed attempts to remove the character from the trans community, the film also goes out of its way to make this extremely clear.
If you see yourself reflected in a man who's wearing a scalped woman's hair, that is a you problem, bro. That is a you problem, bro. What?
Notice how that's not a wig. That scene doesn't appear in the book. It was an improvisation by Demi and Ted Levine, who plays Bill in the film. and I wouldn't have boasted about it as much as they did. In the book, there's a subplot in which Crawford visits the gender reassignment hospital suggested by Lecter and finds himself locked in a battle with the doctor there.
You like the truth? Try this. He kidnaps young women and rips their skin off.
Some of this subplot made its way into what was shot, but ultimately wound up on the cutting room floor. But even so, it doesn't change the problem. Because you see, the problem isn't that Bill is dangerous. I mean, it is, but it isn't just that. The problem is that The Silence of the Lambs doesn't know what the f*** it's talking about. The film's misguided attempts to distance itself from its own mishandling of the issue only further feeds into the problem.
Billy hates his own identity, you see, and he thinks that makes him a transsexual. But his pathology is 1,000 times more savage and more terrifying.
More savage, more terrifying.
On. What's worse, guys? A transsexual or an evil murderer, serial killer guy who, like, cuts up women and wears their skin like suits? What's worse, guys? What's worse?
To pretend like the film doesn't have this nasty streak when it comes to its depiction of trans people is just a lie.
There's no fucking trans people in this movie!
Clear where the film, and by extension the filmmakers, are coming from in this regard.
Our patients are decent, non-violent people with real sexual problems.
This is an extension of the incredibly sexist and homophobic criteria by which medical
Oh, I'm sorry. In the 1990s, I forgot that nobody was woke enough. Nobody was fucking woke enough. I'm sorry. I completely forgot that in the 1990s, when we were still using DSM-4 criteria, that people still had to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria to get fucking access to medical transition. I'm so sorry that they couldn't peer into the future and see that, like, self-ID was going to be the prevalent fucking talking point on the fucking political left. I'm sorry. My bad. Fuck this guy for not being woke enough. Jesus Christ.
Professionals would classify so-called real trans people from those who they decided weren't, and the ways in which they decide.
Well, you guys, I don't know. Medical gatekeeping is really problematic and really dangerous. And the reason why it's really problematic and really dangerous is because, as you see, Buffalo Bill is a trans woman. And because Buffalo Bill has to prove that Buffalo Bill is actually a real trans person, that pathologizing of gender dysphoria and the gatekeeping that ensues causes trans people to become violent murderers who skin people of the opposite sex alive to wear their skins like zombies in order to satiate their desire to be of the opposite sex and alleviate gender dysphoria. In this essay, I will. It's like, did you even think you wrote out a script for this and you thought that this was a good, well, who am I fucking kidding? Of course you thought this was a good idea. Of course you thought this was a good idea, Queen. Of course you were like, slay, 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 slay. If there's one person in the world that I relate to most, it's fucking Buffalo Bill. Who, what? Jesus.
I did this were often based on regressive gender stereotypes, even for the time. And we even see this attitude outright stated in the film.
There's no correlation in the literature between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are very passive.
Yes, Clarice, passive. Because if you're a trans woman, then you better be damn sure that you're a demure, passive, good woman.
Yeah, it's like saying that people who have depression are passive. They don't have violent tendencies. Yeah, it's a pathology. In the 90s, and even today, I'm super sorry, being trans is medically recognized as like some kind of pathology. That's how you get insurance coverage. Like, they're literally just saying, like, Buffalo Bill can't actually be trans because trans people don't, like, kill people to wear their skin because they're dysphoric. Raise your hand if you're trans and you've never killed somebody and wore their skin to help treat dysphoria. It's because they're not comparable. It's because transsexual people don't murder people to alleviate their dysphoria. They're not dysphoric about murder.
Give me a break. When Crawford visits the hospital in the book and in the film's deleted scenes, this same argument is repeated, this time by a medical professional who isn't also a cannibalistic serial killer, I assume. The problem here is that it assumes that there's a right way and a wrong way to be a trans person.
Yeah, I would say that if you're murdering people and cutting off their skin to wear it, I would say that's the wrong way to be a trans person. I know that gatekeeping is like a bad word these days, you guys. I know that, ooga booga boogeyman, gatekeeping, bad. Yeah, whatever, okay. I think that the wrong way to be trans is to kill women and wear their skin like suits. I'm going to be really brave. I'm going to be really brave and say that. I'm going to be really brave and say that I think that there is a wrong way to be trans, and it's killing women. That's just a thought.
And a right way and a wrong way to be a man or a woman. And that, it should go without saying, is f***ing sexist. I need a coffee.
Silence of the Lambs. How about Silence of Lexi? Shut the fuck up. Like, this is horrible.
Okay, so what point am I trying to make?
No one
My
knows.
issue is that the song.
Okay, I actually got it. The point is that you see yourself actualized in Buffalo Bill, and that you're trying to rationalize your own like sick, twisted desires to harm women, and project that onto all trans people. Yes.
Silence of the Lambs isn't just transphobic on accident, but rather that the transphobia is baked into the very foundations of the text. It's built from sexist and transphobic foundation, and everything that is born out of that, from its genre-ness to its feminism to everything, is, in turn, propped up by that offensive and harmful outcome.
Billy is not a real transsexual.
And for me, every time that it's praised or that it's brought up in conversation alongside those other great films, I can't help but get a little prickly because, well, yeah. And it's not that I think it should be erased or anything, it's just that I think that it also needs to be recognised as the harmful, damaging thing that it is. The show...
I'm just gonna take the stunning and brave stance that like trans people who are rapists are way more harmful and damaging than any piece of media that's ever been created in the history of the universe about trans people. I am gonna continue to reiterate that the entire point of Silence of the Lambs, again, is that Buffalo Bill is not trans. That is the entire fucking point of Buffalo Bill's like character arc as a villain, okay? If you want to die on the hill that Buffalo Bill is trans, Norman Bates is also trans, Ed Gein is also trans. Like, the whole point is they are pathologizing their mommy issues to get them away from trans people. Like, I cannot handle... we're almost done, though.
Clarice from 2021, which acts as a sequel to The Silence of the Lambs, attempts to address some of this through the character of Julianne Lawson, played by Jen Richards.
Overnight, suddenly, the biggest story on everyone's minds was that transsexuals were monsters.
But while I appreciate the effort, turning...
Oh, cool. So we're going to look to a movie or a show that was made... like almost 30 years later to dictate like the cultural zeitgeist around the time that Silence of the Lambs was produced. That's the exact issue that I said earlier, where the problem is that at the time that this came out, this was not what was on everybody's mind when it came to perceiving Buffalo Bill. Nobody was like, that is a trans person. They were very acutely aware it was written into the script that Buffalo Bill is not trans. Buffalo Bill is a spinoff of Ed Gein, somebody with mommy issues who wants to be his mom. He's not fucking trans.
This sort of pain and transphobic legacy of the film into just yet another obstacle for Clarice to overcome is, well, it's a choice. We live in a world where the author of Harry Potter literally uses this kind of thing as a motive for the killers in their book, and, well, we've kind of got to do more. Soz. Fundamentally, whenever The Silence of the Lambs appears in discourse, for me it becomes uncomfortable fast. He is held up as a masterpiece of cinema, and I understand why, but why are we so willing to overlook what is, in my mind at least, the most offensive and harmful mainstream film about a trans person ever made, just because the performances are decent and the direction is solid?
Clarice Starling and that awful Jack Crawford have wasted far too much time already.
I guess my question becomes, do I even like The Silence of the Lambs? Can I even like The Silence of the Lambs? This behemoth of horror cinema, a prestige picture that's so showered with praise, so recognised for its brilliance that it transcends not just the realms of horror fandom, but of film fandom in general. A beloved classic, its imagery, characters and dialogue entering into popular culture in a way so few films truly have.
I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner.
My nan quotes this film, and yet still, there's the thing. There's always the thing. And I don't want to talk about it and have to pretend like I'm not mad at it and that I'm not mad every single time it gets brought up in celebration. The truth is, I f***ing hate The Silence of the Lambs, and part of the reason I hate it so much is that it's so good. It's a lot harder to hate.
It's so good because it really portrays my internal feelings and myself. Like, I want to wrap this all up because I can't take much more of this. This is the clearest example of projection I've ever seen presented to me in my entire life. It's a direct one-to-one. This Lexi Bowen person literally is a rapist, is quite literally a rapist. Someone who argued ad nauseum on twitter.com for her right to be in women's facilities, around women's rape shelters, all this other shit. And it's like, I see myself in Buffalo Bill. The first time I saw Buffalo Bill, I thought that was me. Buffalo Bill is a violent misogynist who kills women and wears their skin like suits. That's me. I have never seen a bigger self-report in the history of the entire fucking universe. Ever in the entire fucking universe. Not only is this a joke as far as media literacy is concerned, not only is this a severe case of main character derangement syndrome in the context of Silence of the Lambs, which isn't about trans people, and anybody who has ever seen the movie will fucking tell you that. This is a very clear-cut case of someone who is sick and deranged and who is using their own sick pathology and justifying it through a media lens that doesn't make any sense unless you yourself are a violent psychopath. How on earth can you as a trans person look at Buffalo Bill and say, that's me, I see myself reflected in that, unless you yourself are a sick, deranged fucking freak? Which you are! The question is Silence of the Lambs worse than rape? To this person, probably yeah. To this person, probably yeah. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. What a ride, guys. What a ride. Please hurt me, guys. Please, 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 please. Okay, we're gonna relax. Yeah, the mariachi music really did it for me. It really helped. It really helped. Damn, this is gonna really age poorly. That video I made on Ocean 11s.